And Mayor, thanks for wind shuttle help. Thanks for bailing me out. And Commissioner, you bailed me out a few months ago and hadn't seen you since.
Yes,
So,
it's good.
to see you.
Welcome
Thank you.
back.
Thank you. So let's call the meeting to order. And let me ask if there's anyone, and this is, of course, the regular meeting of the Transportation Advisory Board of the Met Council. It is July 19, 2023 at 12:34 p.m. Just a heads up, our next meeting will be held. You know, sometimes we've taken a month off in the summer. No, Elaine is unrelenting. August 16th, we'll be meeting again, so no summer break. So is there anyone in the public, in the audience, who wishes to address the tab on a matter of concern to them? All right, seeing nobody coming forward, don't hear anything. Let's move on to reports. Let's go back to the approval of the agenda first. I guess I call the meeting to order.
Second.
I got a motion, Member Anderson, second, Commissioner Gattel, to approve the agenda as published. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Now we'll go to the public. We didn't have anybody here. I don't think anybody's, if they are here and want to speak, they would have made us aware of that by now. All right, chair's reports. I guess a couple of things I can report out on. You know, the item that got tabled last meeting, which I think was at the discussion around Brooklyn Park withdrawing the request for a program year extension and then resubmitting a request with Hennepin County to include 3 projects affected by the Blue Line construction timing. We're going to deal with that next month. So thanks for that good discussion. A lot of interesting things unfolded there. I had a good conversation with Elaine about it. And so we'll deal with that next month. And then there's this legislative task force that's been formed to look at Metropolitan Council governance, and I'll be the city rep. If, Metro Cities asked me to be the city rep on there. So I think it's a relatively small group of maybe half a dozen folks. So I'll keep you posted on that as well. That's it for me. I'm going to go to Mike Barnes now at MnDOT.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple items. First, on the update on safety, kind of on the TZD side. Through July 16th, we've had 187 traffic deaths, which is about 11% less than last year and 19% less than in 2021. The key part from this now is we're starting to get close in approaching what was the pre-pandemic level. So it's working its way back up, which is not a good thing. And just a note from meetings that I've been in, we're starting to see many more people traveling 100 miles an hour plus through work zones. So that is something that's out there. So just speed in itself is, had its problems, especially during the pandemic, but we're seeing much more high speed through areas that we definitely want people to be doing less. So it is one where, again, everybody in here I know does well with that, but pass messages along about just watching in the work zone. Besides speed, it's just paying attention to. So the other one that I did, and you probably already seen it from in the announcements, but was the Quarters of Commerce that the governor's office did announce last week, which was $380 million, 8 projects, which are in the metro end up being 3 good projects out of this. The 13 grade separation between Quentin and Nicollet, $96 million project, so that's a big one. And then 65 from 103rd to 117th for $30 million. And again, some of these also got other designated funding and other funding sources to come out of the session. So this, I'm just mentioning more or less from the Quarters of Commerce. And then on Highway 10, a lane ad between Hanson and Cassaw 9. Or just the 3 out of the 8 from the Quarters of Commerce. And I've already had a couple ask about it. I will send the link to Elaine so then folks can look at some more about that. So unless there's any other question or any questions, that's all I had.
Member Lindeke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about that speeding issue. I remember reading somewhere about the possibility of automated speed camera enforcement in work zones. Is that something you're familiar with? You can update us on the status of that, or if MnDOT's supporting that application?
Yeah, I could have some, again, send some additional information. I'm not as up on all of the details. A lot of these, it ended up having to have a patrol or somebody nearby, you know, with that. And there was the rule where you can then go later to get some for some of the enforcement. But I'll get information and send it on the specifics.
Okay, thanks.
One other thing I thought of Member Barnes was, with the work starting on 494, I think there's a webinar next Wednesday. I don't know if you know anything about that, but I think it's like 11:30 to 12:30 webinar, and the project manager is putting on. I think people could probably look at MnDOT's website to figure out how to get access to the webinar.
Sure,
And then I think Commuter Services was participating in that one as well.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure it's under one of the regular updates that we're trying to get out on what the traffic, any kind of traffic changes. But again, I can send links on those.
And if memory serves me right, I think phase one of that project was Richfield to Edina, and it was going to be running from now until 2026. So there's apparently a lot of work to be done there, including the interchange. Minnesota is probably the most important interchange at 35W 494. Okay. All right, let's go on to Member Bwin at MPCA, see if we have.
Way back here in the corner. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think the last few months, it feels like every time we come, we talk about grants. And there's a lot of money that's coming to us to be distributed for different things. Last month, it was about climate resiliency in communities. This month, I think a tangential thing to what we do here in the tab is speaking to a grant program around community air monitoring. We'll be administering a grant program for the next 4 years. It's $5 million, and it's for 7-county metro area. And really what it is to encourage folks to team up in a community with a nonprofit and with folks who can help deploy air monitors. We'll be providing money in a program that will fund these monitoring programs. We think it's related to this team or this group because we think we'll learn more about air quality in urban areas, along roadways. From this, it'll be sensors that collect pollution information in the urban areas. So the focus is on sensors in areas of concern for environmental justice and where there are elevated rates of illness due to air pollution. The grant program is being developed right now, more information to come, but it'll run, as I said, for 4 years. And eligible expenditures will be for staff time, outreach, as well as the monitoring equipment and data analysis capabilities. So we can provide updates on that in the future as the program is launched. It's not yet launched.
Okay.
That's all I had for today.
All right. Let me ask you a question. Do you have anything on the MPCA website about the Inflation Reduction Act and this electrification of America and what your role is going to be and what the funds are coming to Minnesota so cities and counties and everybody involved in local governance can start to think about what those opportunities are?
Absolutely. When that information, I mean, we do have quite a bit of information already on electrification that's happening, whether it's through the VW settlement, whether it's through other state funds. The IRA will be another additional pot of money that'll be available for that. I'm not sure what's exactly there on the IRA right now, but I could check on that and make sure that it's highlighted for the group if you want us to do that.
Yeah, that would be good. I think the next meeting in August, if you could report out on our IRA opportunities. And then on the Volkswagen settlement monies that you've used to help electrify or build out the system of electrification for motor vehicles around the state, what's the status on that?
We're in phase 3. We're in there's about 3 years yet to go on that. We've been at it for about 4 years. And as in each phase, there'll be a significant amount of the dollars for electrification. I think I don't have an electric vehicle myself, so I'm not as familiar. I travel around Minnesota a lot, but probably folks here know better than I am in terms of how the roadways are equipped. I know we're making progress. I know the corridors that we're focusing on and things like that. So there's much progress there, and that'll continue to be the focus as we move forward.
Okay, good. Questions for Member Bwin or MPCA? Member Payne, I know you're sitting right next to Member Bewan, but I feel like you're in another zip code. Are you comfortable where you are? Because we could have Member Petrick move over a little bit. There's room up there. Are you okay? I'm okay. All right, okay, very good. Good to have you here. Let's turn then to the MAC. And Member Crimmins, I'm sure you'll have some interesting information for us about airport operations.
No challenge, no. Thank you, Mr.
I
Chair.
heard nobody can go to Iceland now. That's the rage. Nobody can find a ticket to Iceland, so I don't know if you can talk about that at all.
Well, I'm not as far as Iceland, but we are discussing a joint powers agreement with the Met Council. And it looks like we'll be approving it on Monday's meeting. The commission will approve it. We're going to have the airport police on light rail from 4 a.m. to 12 noon every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and to help out the Met Council Police Department. And then Met Council Police will take over after that. And the airport's being reimbursed by the Met Council. I think it's more staffing levels than anything else, but, so we're gonna sign a joint powers agreement, hopefully on Monday. Then we have the FAA has decided to send surveys out to people and homes that are near the airport. Now, I don't know what the FAA defines as near the airport. They're gonna mail out these surveys to the homeowners. They wanna know how they're sleeping at night and how the airport noise is affecting them. And if a participant decides to join the survey, they will be given a recorder to put in their bedroom, and we're a monitor to measure their sleep activity and blood pressures during the evening. So that would be something between the homeowner and the FAA. I didn't hear about it, I just read it on an email that was coming through. So I thought that was very interesting. And again, I don't know what they define as close to the airport, if it's a block, a mile, 2 miles, I don't know. So the FAA is gonna decide who to send the surveys to. And the last thing I have is the MSP, MAC, has been awarded by ACI North America, Airport Councils, International, has been awarded an accreditation for passenger accessibility, level 3. Level 3 is the highest level in 1,900 airports. And because we invest in technology, infrastructure, training, and service, they awarded them the level 3, us the level 3. And in the past, we've used parked airplanes for families that have people with disabilities and other challenges, somebody that's recently disabled, to come and board the airplane and see how it's try to alleviate any unknown pressures on the family, service dogs, training. We train service dogs in these airplanes. But now instead of using parked airplanes, we put a mock-up in Terminal 1. And you can make a reservation and you can come and participate in this mock-up. It's a full-size jet and it's about 20 rows of seats. So people can see what it's like to be getting on and getting off, and they close the doors and they simulate a little bit of flight activity. But we also have apps at the airport now for people that are sight challenged. If you're having a problem with your sight, if you have not only just blind, but if you have deferred vision, or you can go onto this app and they will actually guide you through the airport. They'll tell you where you're at and where to go, make a left turn, right turn. So we have things like that. Plus, like I said, the service dogs. And we have a committee, it's called Travelers with Disabilities Advisory Committee. And it consists of disability advocates, airport staff, airline representatives, contractors, and the TSA. And we meet regularly, monthly, and they decide how they can help travel through the airport and travel on planes to be a little easier on the mental capacity for people. So there takes the unknown factors out, and it's been quite successful. So we're pretty proud of this. We're one of the few airports that receive level 3, which is the highest level you can get. So.
Thank you for that. And the passenger traffic continues to be improving, or?
It's passenger traffic's picking up. We're back to 2019 levels, and they believe they're gonna be going up further. There's more routes being added. Even for 2024, they're starting to announce new routes, so the airplanes are taking off like crazy. But air traffic is picking up.
Yeah, okay, good. Questions for Member Crimmins yes, Member Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What's the cost of the airport security program, the 4 a.m. to midnight, 365 days a week?
From the Met Council,
Yeah.
since it's somewhere around $700,000 to $800,000. It goes from now until February of '24 with a 1-year extension, if it's agreed to between Met Council and the airport.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions for Member Crimmins? All right, let's go to Member Barber.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. My first update relates to the Metropolitan Council transit ridership. From January through April 2023, the council delivered nearly 15 million rides. This is a 19% increase over 2022, with bus and light rail increasing nearly 2.5 million rides over 2022. Bus ridership grew 18% and was comprised of 11% growth in local service, 80% growth in the D-Line corridor. As you recall, the D-Line opened in December of 2022, 16% growth in the other BRT lines. As part of its ridership report, the council heard more about how transit market areas are developed. Transit market areas are comprised of a composite of population and employment density, intersection density, and vehicle ownership. Transit market areas are an effective predictor of propensity to ride transit across geographic areas. The largest growth in transit ridership from 2022 to 2023 has occurred in Markets Area 1, which comprises the areas of the central cities and the inner ring suburbs. My second update relates to the Transportation Policy Plan goals and objectives. Following inputs across the past several months, the council has begun to develop draft goals and objectives for the region's 2050 Transportation Policy Plan. Transportation goal statements were developed through technical, policymaker, and targeted audience workshops, including 2 phases of engagement. It'll surprise no one here that transportation safety and security emerged as the clear transportation priority from input. From 2 phases of input, the council has assembled 14 objective statements corresponding to the 5 overarching regional goals. These will be shared with the council's 2050 TPP advisory work group on Friday, which includes several tab members, and the objectives will continue to be refined through stakeholder and public input in the weeks ahead and will ultimately inform the policy development for the draft plan. And that's it today.
All right, thank you. For Barber. All right, thank you. And then TAC Chair Hager, you have anything you want to report out on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board.
Oh, excuse me. Hold
One before?
hold that thought.
Got it.
I forgot about Member Hanson and the Suburban Transit
Right
Authority.
here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I looked at him and I was going to call on him and then I just jumped right past him. So my apologies.
That's fine. The suburban providers report that the motor vehicle sales tax revenues appear to be on track to outperform fiscal year 2022, which is good news from a transit operations perspective. Procurement of buses continues to be a struggle, including microtransit vehicles, which are in high demand. Ridership is slowly increasing, but still not at pre-pandemic levels, and microtransit continues to perform well. And special services have been highly successful. Minnesota Valley Transit and Southwest Transit ran successful service to the Taylor Swift concerts, and MBTA reported 3,600 riders over the 2 days on their Swiftie buses. So I'm sure they'll be probably going to do that same thing for the Beyonce concert too. I don't know, but so continuing the special services theme, Maple Grove Transit is providing shuttle service to Maple Grove Days, and providers are planning service to events such as the Renaissance Festival and the State Fair. So we're finding that those kinds of services are very popular. Thank you.
Questions for Member Hanson? And would you remind us again the definition of microtransit? You're getting quite a bit of demand around microtransit. What is that?
It's the minibuses, the local routes, yes. As an example, MBTA has MBTA Connect, which is ride on demand, is what it is. And Southwest Transit has a very active ride on demand too, and they use the smaller buses.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. Other questions for Member Hanson? Now I'll bring Chair Hager, back up.
Okay, thank you again, Mr. Chair, members of the board. TAC did not meet in July. However, there was a joint meeting of funding and programming in TAC in June where members were given information and had some early discussion related to the active transportation funding from the new sales tax, which is an information item today on the agenda for you all. Funding and programming will continue the discussion on this item tomorrow with their recommendation moving to TAC on August 2nd, and then the item comes back to TAB in August. The initial technical committees, initially the technical committees are looking forward to hearing TAB's thoughts from today's discussion. I would say that generally there's a desire from the technical committee members to slow the process down and to take some additional time to talk about this new funding. The memo attached to today's agenda outlines a path forward related to the 2024 regional solicitation or taking additional time via the full evaluation that will happen between 2024 and 2026. So based on what I'm hearing right now, there's a general desire for us to take that additional time offered by that full evaluation from the technical committees. And I can answer any questions about the what and why if there are any.
Yes, Commissioner.
Or comment, maybe it's both. Would it be true to say that the joint meeting, many felt that that additional money should be in a separate process rather than folded into the solicitation? What kind of conversation did they have on that?
Mr. Chair and members of the board, there were some committee members that were asking the question about whether the funds should be allocated through the regional solicitation, and if so, how that happens. It's an open question. There's different things to consider with these funds. They don't necessarily come with all the same requirements that federal funds come with. So what's laid out today, and I don't want to get too far ahead of Steve, but what's laid out today is an option where some of the funds could come out through the 2024 regional solicitation, or we look towards the evaluation that will happen between solicitations where we really go back to ground zero and evaluate all the different funding sources that we have to work with and the best way to administer those going forward. And that's where the technical committees stand right now.
Thank you.
So, any follow-on?
No, I don't.
Okay, all right, thanks. When you said the desire of the joint committees was to slow the process down, are we going to talk about that in the context of Steve's report out, or do you want to talk a little bit more about that right now?
Mr. Chair, I think it would be good for Steve to be able to do his presentation later on in the agenda, and then I'm happy to come back up and answer any questions or share additional thoughts.
Yeah, because I think the conversation may evolve around, do we want to do anything now or hold until 2026? And then we can talk about those different options. And I think as part of the conversation, you were interested in having a tab conduct amongst its membership. So let's hold on that. I think that's a good idea. All right, anything else?
That's it. Thank you, Mr.
All
Chair.
right, any questions for the chair? Okay, very good. We've got minutes from June 21, 2023. Any changes, corrections? Otherwise, entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right. I think the mayor's had his hand up to move it and take this. You don't, or did you have your hand up for something else?
No, I was just moving that forward.
Okay.
Somebody else is in there, don't worry about it.
All right. So we'll ask you to speak up next time instead of just wave your hand. All right. We got a motion by Member Anderson, second by Commissioner Gattel to approve the minutes of June 21, 2023. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the minutes of June 21, 2023, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. And now we will go on to the non-action, the non-consent business items, now we want to call them. And we're going to have a little conversation around the regional solicitation and the public comments and recommendations that evolved out of that. And both Jed Hanson and Steve Peterson are going to guide us through that. I think we had, Steve, 13 individual comments, I think.
We do, thank you, Mr. Chair. Gave Jed the day off here, so I'll just.
Jed, yeah, I was looking around, didn't see Jed anywhere, so.
No, he's here, he's working.
You're the man, or the person.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the first The first item before you here, and really the only action item today is we're asking the Transportation Advisory Board to accept the public comments for the 2024 regional solicitation. This will be a 2-month approval. I'll say usually we do it in 1 month, if you remember from 2 years ago, but in this case, we did receive quite a few technical comments, and we'd like those to flow back through the technical committees for some further vetting. So at this stage, we are asking just to accept the public comments. We did receive 13 public comments on the regional solicitation applications, and I will say they were very thoughtful comments. If you read through them, there's quite a bit of time that was put in by many of our partners and some individuals on sometimes specific projects or specific scoring criteria, and we do anticipate making some changes, and we'll show those to you with track changes in the application next month. We have a general staff response that's included in the packet, but the specific changes, again, we want to vet by the technical committees because many of those are minor scoring guidance, definition changes. We had seen Hennepin County here, some bridge comments from Hennepin County, some others from Three Rivers on changing some language, and do think we should take the time to vet that. So today, just acceptance of the public comments. Next month, you'll decide which of those public comments you want to see in the application as part of its release. So back to you, Mr. Chair.
All right, are there questions for Steve Peterson? Yes, Commissioner.
I'd just like to make a very positive comment, first of all, and say, first of all, thank you very much. You know, we appreciate that the Met Council staff is looking at the 2024 regional solicitation, you know, and looking at some of the alignment with the bridge eligibility criteria with the state aid. That's going to be really helpful for us and for my colleagues at the table here. The other thing that I thought was interesting and very positive is further exploring how bridge preservation strategies can be incorporated into the regional solicitation beginning in the 2026 cycle. I know that's being considered. You know, it balances the investments for our bridges, and, you know, the likelihood of having some kind of a critical bridge issue could be avoided by having some of those kinds of things in the solicitation. So I just think that this is a real positive step in that direction. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. So Steve, what the notion is that we accept the public comments this month, if the tab is so inclined, and then provide any feedback at this meeting, which looks like it's going to be limited, and then you'll come back with proposed red line changes at the next meeting in terms of the solicitation.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I'll move it, Mr. Chair.
All right, very good. So we've got a motion to accept the public comments for the 2024 regional solicitation. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Mayor Bailey seconds. Any further discussion? Oh, yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I asked Steve just a question. From my reading of this, there was only one public commenter, I think it was on the transit. Is that, sorry to be so in the weeds.
Yeah.
You know, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Dugan. I do believe that's the case. I'd have to confirm that by quickly kind of glancing through here, but a lot of it were agencies or other nonprofits and others.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Any other comments, questions? All right, we've got a motion and a second. All those in favor of accepting the public comments for the 2024 regional solicitation, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right, we'll see you next month with a markup. And then we're going to go now into the, that was our only action item. We're going to go into informational matters here. And the first one is going to be a real, I think, a real interesting discussion for the tab. I look forward to hearing all the comments about this whole sales and use tax issue. And we'll let Steve Peterson kind of set the stage with his presentation, and then we'll have a discussion on how we want to deploy these funds.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good preview from our TAC chair, Jeni Hager, on some of the discussions we've been having at the technical level on these funds, and it's a good problem to have. We have more money available, and similar to the new Protect program, carbon reduction, we have some new programs and money available that's coming through the tab and through the Met Council. So I think that's the most important thing. We've got more money and lots of needs on our transportation system. So the new funding source we want to talk to you about today, and we did also preview this with TAB Executive last month, is part of the regional sales tax that was approved by the state legislature this last session. So of course, some of that money is going towards transit. Some of that money is going to the 7 counties in the metro area, of which some of that county money, approximately 50 million or so, does have to go to active transportation sources. That's given in the county money. And then part of the transit money, the 5% of it does go for active transportation. That's defined as bicycling, pedestrian activities, and other forms of non-motorized transportation. So a bit of a few questions. What is active transportation? It's a new term, or not everybody uses that term, but it is meant to be non-motorized transportation. So that small little 5% adds up to quite a bit. It's $24 million per year. Its solicitation and application flows through the tab, so you have direct decision-making authority over how this money is spent on which projects and the other details therein. The process, and we did put some of the relevant session law here at the bottom of the PowerPoint slide. The process for selecting must include solicitation, evaluation, prioritization, and must align with the procedures and requirements established for TAB's other sources of funds. So our reading of that is that must show some level of alignment with the regional solicitation process that we currently have. Currently, we do think for sure that eligibility does line up with 3 of our categories quite well. That being the multi-use trail, pedestrian facilities, and safe routes to school application criteria. So again, $24 million. The other point to make, the money is starting to be generated October 1st. And so just like the rest of the sales tax, the money starts flowing here October 1. Our current solicitation is already out to 28 and 29. So we've got quite a few years of potential money to think about here in terms of the collection relative to where the other federal funds are at. So the other requirements in the law, and there's 7 of them, we do have to abide by all 7 of those. So we did have a question too, do you have to hit all 7 of these, or 1 or 2 or 3? I think the answer is you need to hit all of them. We think the current regional solicitation hits most, but not all of those. There would need to be a few small, I'll call them tweaks to the qualifying requirements if you wanted to pursue these funds. The first of which is the project's inclusion in a regional non-motorized transportation plan. So we have a similar qualifying requirement. You need to be in a plan, or the need for the project must need to be in the plan, but this is asking for a non-motorized system plan, so maybe a slight tweak there. The project must, number 2, must align with the policies and practices of complete street planning, design, and construction. So we would ask, in this case, applicants, if they, in a qualitative way, they can respond to that, and they would pass that bar. And then number 6, maybe was another one that people have had some questions on. Geographic equity and project benefits, with an emphasis on communities that are historically and currently underrepresented in local and regional planning. So there might be kind of 2 parts to this. One might be more of the geographic balance, how the projects are distributed throughout the region, and then certainly that equity side of historically and currently underrepresented in local and regional planning, and that's a scoring criterion and measure that you already have in the regional solicitation. So those are the 7 requirements, and today what we wanted to ask of you, again, it's not an action item, it is an information item, but the timing is a little precarious here. We just found out about the session and started digging into the details here. On the cusp, or we're on the heels of releasing the 2024 regional solicitation cycle. And so the question I think before you today is, 1, do you want to modify with a few small tweaks the 2024 regional solicitation to accommodate this new funding source, the regional sales tax? The pro of that would that you could start, we had about $70 or $80 million of non-motorized applications that were left unfunded. So certainly the demand for those types of projects outpaces the supply of money, federal dollars that we have. So the pro of that, you could start spending some of the money if we put it into this 2024 solicitation. The con to doing it now would be, and you heard this from Chair Hager, is that there's limited time to kind of further vet this, discuss it, have more meetings. The people that were involved with unique projects, we had 10 meetings probably on unique projects to get to kind of agreement. We've had those meetings on the regional solicitation and the measures. We've had a public comment period. So we think kind of doing a major change last second, a new application or something else doesn't make sense because we've already done the public comment period. The measures have been vetted. So a very, limited amount of changes could take place to the regional solicitation. Option number 2, and probably where the technical folks are leaning at this point, would be to wait to allocate the funds until after the 2026 regional solicitation evaluation. So that would push using these funds a few years out. Either way, whether we do 1 or 2, we will have time to kind of have plenty of meetings. We've got work groups already in a scope of work for the regional solicitation evaluation with a consultant team to help us think through not just active transportation, but protect and carbon reduction, these new 3 new programs. And so there'll be plenty of time to kind of further vet it if people want to do a separate solicitation, a different time frame, a different allocation source. There'll be time to do that, and that's fine. The con to waiting till post 2026 is, again, the money is starting to be generated this fall. So we might have upwards of $130 million sitting in the Met Council bank account, and not investing that in resources and projects to get onto the street for active transportation, which really was the thrust behind the legislation. So certainly there's pros and cons to both. We're a little bit rushed, and I feel that from our technical folks, and because we're about to release the solicitation, if we want to bring that money into it, we can do that, but also hearing, there might be some value in waiting until the 2026 cycle. So I think with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to you. We've got some options on how we could accomplish it, and that's the later slides. But really the first question is, do you have any questions on this legislation? What does it mean? How much money? I think we want to kind of establish the baseline first and then start thinking about this question on the screen on kind of now, or do you want to hold on using some of this money? So, Mr. Chair?
I'm thinking as we look at this, when you talk about potential minor modifications necessary to include some of the funding in this cycle, that may influence how people discuss this issue. So I'm wondering if you could just touch on what you think we might have to do to include it in this solicitation, and that may affect how people are thinking about whether to hold off or advance it.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair.
And then I'll go to question. I think Mayor Winchell is first, and then Member Payne, and then Member Jalali.
Okay, they're lining up.
Yeah. Well, there's money around.
Good topic. It's a good problem to have.
Then Commissioner.
Yeah, so if we were to do it with the 2024 cycle, which of course you're going to be asked to release next month at TAB, we would have to make minor changes to what is shown on the screen to be consistent with the legislation. There would need to be 2 new qualifying requirements the applicants would need to check. 1, are they in a non-motorized system or local plan? They'd have to list that, number 1. Number 2, they'd have to answer how it is connected to complete streets policy or practices, the project or the municipality. And then the last one was that geographic equity. And we did propose a path forward on a minor rule change to make sure that there is some level of geographic balance. It may not be where the rule would end up, but we did hear at the Bike Ped Work Group on Friday that one way to think about this would be to make sure that, to ensure at least one project is funded kind of in the urban core, urban center, and then on different rings kind of going outward towards the exurbs and rural areas. And so that, I think, something along that line that would be similar to the A minor arterial rule would hit this note number 6 on geographic equity. So those are the, when I say minor, I think those are the 3 minor changes that we'd have to make.
I want to get one more piece of background information in front of the TAB members here. I want to have Chair Hager come back up and give her perspective on what the technical folks were kind of concerned about. So, and whether trying to put something in this solicitation is moving too fast, as you characterized earlier in your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I've spoken with many members of funding and programming and TAC, but not all members. So I just want to say that there. So what I'm sharing is a perspective that seems to be kind of the consensus of most of the group, but not all. Members right now, there's a lot of questions about these funds. They're not federal funds. And what's proposed, if we were to move forward with the 2024 regional solicitation, is to tie a lot of federal requirements that are already part of our federal dollars to these new dollars, unnecessarily in many cases. So those of you who have staff that are delivering these federal projects and managing CIPs know that one of the greatest challenges and limiting factors that all of us are dealing with right now are the local dollars available to match federal dollars. Given that we've already accelerated the next solicitation, it should have come out in 2024, it's coming out later here in 2023, many of us, many local agencies, that's put some pressure on managing CIPs because we haven't had the opportunity to take a look at and alter, potentially amend our CIPs to account for additional projects that local agencies might be applying for. So then we put more money on top of the regional solicitation, and that just adds that pressure on the local agencies and their capital improvement programs. So those are kind of the high-level concerns that are coming out. I don't know that the technical committees have gone into great detail yet about what they would have to change in the package itself because they haven't gotten to the point where they think that that's the right path forward. They're asking a lot of questions about why we would move more quickly, potentially trading off more thoughtful decision-making for speed. So.
Okay, all right, that's all helpful, I think. Let's go now to some of our members that have questions or comments. Mayor Winchell, you want to start it out?
Can I just clarify one thing, Mr. Chair? Sorry.
Sure.
What's the CIP? Can you remind me?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, members of the board, CIP is technical speak for capital improvement program, so.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
All
can I
right.
just speak to the
Commissioner?
mechanics of this? So, for instance, right now, Dakota County, we won't put our draft plan out to our communities until like August or September. And then they comment back, and we won't have a full revised CIP which has lots of changes given the new federal money and then the state money, even back to be approved until likely December. Okay. And the application period for this new money would start in a matter of weeks.
I appreciate that timing issue being advanced. All right, let's go to Mayor Winchell and then Member Payne.
So my question goes back to slide 2, Steve, and we talk about non-motorized transportation. And this is kind of more of a blanket question. How are we handling the motorized scooters and bikes on a non-motorized trail system? And I'm starting to see more and more complaints happening about those buzzing by people that are walking, that are, startled. And I guess it's, maybe this isn't the opportunity, but I'm trying to understand that. How are we handling non-motorized with motorized vehicles now? And a lot of them.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So that was a question that we did receive previously, and from talking to some of my coworkers, it sounds like some localities and parks districts have rules that limit kind of electric bikes or electric scooters on their systems. Others do not, and that's, you're seeing a mix, or and in other cases, people go where they want to go. So you're seeing electric bikes and electric scooters on systems that are restricting those. So in this case, non-motorized, would it be open and could it be used by electric bike or electric scooter? The answer is probably yes. And would it be? Probably, but I still think that, the sidewalks, trails, and those types of improvements would still qualify here. But you're identifying an emerging issue, I'll say, on our systems, yep.
You're just seeing more and more complaints, and I really haven't. I just thought this was a great opportunity to ask, and you kept talking non-motorized, kind of flip the switch, so thank you.
Or partially motorized sometimes, you're biking and
Well, I would think whatever jurisdiction controls the pathway system or the non-motorized system would be making that determination. But I've also heard a distinction between the electric vehicles that you can accelerate like you would a motorcycle, as opposed to the ones that are, power generated by your legs with a power assist.
Well, that's
So,
just it, there's so many of them out there now, and I've seen some.
but we're getting a little bit off track here, but I'm gonna let Member Barber speak.
Yeah, very, very quickly, so you can get on with the questions. For this particular topic, state law defines electric bikes as less than 20 miles per hour as bicycles versus like more of a moped or motorcycle.
All right, let's hand that microphone back to Member Payne.
Have radar guns on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just first wanted to say I agree with Jeni's assessment that we should maybe slow down rather than rushing this into the current solicitation. And I feel that way because it's the language is very clear that this should be prioritizing, well, non-motorized, technically, transportation. And that's in a little bit in conflict with the language that says it has to align with procedures that are already established, which are comprehensive across all modalities, right? So I think there's some tension that needs to be resolved in that, and rushing through a process is going to have us running headlong into that tension without any resolution to it. And then secondly, I think some of these questions around like how do we define motorized and non-motorized, I think not all jurisdictions are going to be ready with the non-motorized transportation system plan. So I think there's going to be some disadvantages. Like Minneapolis has all of our planning documents ready to go. We would be very well aligned with moving forward this year, but I don't know that every jurisdiction would be able to meet some of these requirements. So they would be disadvantaged. And I just think that we should be, I would rather us take a beat and get our weighting and scoring accurate towards the intention of this law, which is very explicit about prioritizing non-motorized transportation, than trying to rush it through just to take advantage of some dollars quickly. So that would be my perspective. And I just think that, especially when we start thinking about the additional burden of the federal requirements around local match, I think that it's going to be disadvantaged for a lot of jurisdictions to rush into this. And from my perspective, I'd highly prioritize non-motorized transportation, and I'd rather see our scoring reflect that, as it is very clearly outlined in the law.
Thank you, Member Payne. Member Jalali.
Thanks. I'm reacting to a lot right now, but I've been able to have some discussion with our staff, and they've brought some points to my attention as we've been able to digest this. So I want to just talk through some pretty serious concerns that we have, and just actually even back up from where we started. There were a few slides ago where it said we could do option A or option B, and I think either one of those is actually further than we should be at this point. First, I want to say it is a huge deal that we have this dedicated funding source. It is a transformational, historic thing, and I share the urgency of making sure that we don't just lurch into what we're going to do with it, but we run the risk of the other direction of just thoughtlessly proceeding on fake urgency and not actually maximizing the opportunity that I think these funds represent for all of our communities. So my first ask is I would like our staff and this body to take a breath and think about how we want our dreams for our communities to come true with the opportunity that these funds that don't have to follow the same rules as regional solicitation, don't come with the same restrictions as federal funds, could represent. So that's my first ask, is to echo what others have said. I really strongly feel we need more time. I recognize we're saying today there isn't a decision being made, but it does feel disingenuous to say that when it feels like decisions are getting shaped up in meetings that we're not in, and it should be the other way around. This body should give direction to staff. We should co-develop a solution together. So I'm asking for more time, and that is coming from all of us at the City of St. Paul. And then additionally, that we clarify the process from here of what is and isn't getting decided. So that's just point number one. I want to share some points about why our team at the City of St. Paul really strongly opposes putting this into the regional solicitation and just assuming that that's going to be what we do. The regional solicitation application process, as we've said, would impose new requirements on these funds not included in state legislation. Including these funds in that could unnecessarily federalize the funds or presents the opportunity for confusion about state versus federal funds. Agencies need that clarity when applying for what they're applying for, whether the funds are state or federal. There's also the option I think we should pursue of having a separate solicitation process that takes the best learnings from regional solicitation, but actually doesn't needlessly add on requirements. There's not as many requirements in the state law, and I think that we should use that to our advantage. There's also the funds that the state law does give us direction that the funds need to be used for certain uses like walking, SRTS, bike projects. And I'm concerned that we're actually going down a direction where we exclude certain of those projects. So it doesn't add up to me that we would do things that the law doesn't require that limit the fund's potential and then exclude things that the law does require that are for that purpose. Like, we need to line that up better, and more time allows us to do that around our shared goals. Lastly, I just can't emphasize enough, like, there is no requirement to disperse these funds by a certain date under the law. So I think that we should, and I can think of it in my head as like just a few additional conversations, either around this table or a separate group or whatever is the most transparent process. But I think it needs to be laid out. How does the decision get made for what solicitation process they go under? And then some at least commitments here to dedicated conversations in the whole group in a really transparent way where we can all learn along at the same time about how we will get to a proposal that informs that decision. So time, more discussion, separate process, and some commitments today that get to that. So that's coming from St. Paul, and I welcome others' thoughts if that is similar to how you feel. I'm personally I'm very excited about the potential of these funds, and I'm very concerned about the direction we're already headed on, and I would like us to take a beat. And with that, I yield to whoever's going next. Thank you.
Good, thank you for that. So just to be clear, what the city of St. Paul is thinking is that you can create a mechanism that aligns with what we otherwise do from a funding standpoint, but doesn't have to be subsumed into that particular process.
I think we would be at a huge disadvantage to just pile all this into the regional solicitation. I think we can develop a separate solicitation that satisfies the law and doesn't burden the funding with the requirements regional does, and that we could take time to do that and make sure that we don't have to start from zero. Like, we have a lot of lessons learned about processes to disperse these funds. I feel like I've heard a bunch of people say just today, like, we're hearing a lot of grants lately. Like, that's the power of this board, and let's make sure for the funding streams we're getting that those resources return to our communities the way they were intended and the way they're required to. And so I'm very game to just do the work of even helping develop that process. I'm concerned that the way this has been presented today is like, it's assumed it's just going right into regional solicitation. It's like coupled with regional solicitation. I think we should have an awareness of that. I think it's very reasonable and practical to understand how what we create fits into that. But that is so different than saying, bam, all this is now going into this thing, and all of a sudden now we have all these other pieces that come with that, especially when that's not even the direction that the state held us to. So I hope that clarifies what I'm saying, but that's what I think I'd like to get us to get to.
Very, very helpful. Commissioner Karwoski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with pretty much what's been said. Board Member Kajali.
Jalali, thank you.
Jalali.
Just also fine, no worries.
I think she articulated a lot of concerning reasons. I really think TAC Chair Hager rounded out concerns. I'm really, actually, to be quite frank, disappointed what's presented here. I don't think the input from TAC or other input was really properly shown. I hate to be critical, but I will. I think, and I hate to be redundant, but I think it's worth, I'm representing Washington County. I think when we have 7 criteria required, and then we have a presentation that wants to put in the solicitation, which isn't part of the legislation, and wants to add other rules, we like the opportunity when we have less restrictions on the money. You know, as an example, you said just safe routes to school and pedestrian projects. There's more opportunities than that. You know, these funds are a great opportunity for the region. And what's really a great opportunity because they have few restrictions. And, you know, the smaller cities that are all in our counties have more opportunity to apply for the funds if we keep them on a separate grant, not in the solicitation. There's a lot of cost on those solicitations. A lot of our cities in our county won't qualify. Even right now, we have a Hugo and a Cottage Grove, a lot of things you won't apply for, and those are some of our bigger cities. So it's very concerning what's presented here. It's a complex application. It should be, again, separate grant. I'll wrap it up here with a few more. A separate application. Then, you know, you're recommending adding a matching fund. We don't have to do that. It could be no match, 100% funding. And to delay, put these in the solicitation and delay it. This is yearly money. I think we should, if there's a need, we should spend it as it goes through a grant process. Anyhow, I'll leave it at that. I hope we send this back to the drawing board and we get more input, more thoughtful, careful input.
Thank you, Commissioner Gattell. And then we're going to go to Member Lindeke and then Member Jenkins.
Did you get Holmberg again? Yeah, we got.
Yeah, no, we got you on the list.
I just want to make sure everybody got on the list.
Elaine's doing a good job.
This is going
of,
around. I'm going to
tracking
add
everything.
to the consensus here of holding off on throwing this into our solicitation. The biggest thing, one of the biggest roadblocks that I'm going to see is trying to fit that into something when we got CIPs as well. I'm going to reiterate what my great colleague across here said. You know, about that whole solicitation process and everything. Also, the flexibility of these dollars has been pointed out by other members around here. We need that flexibility. I don't want to tie it up in this federal program. I want it separated too, because of what we might be able to do. And I think, Member Kowalski, you pointed out the fact that local will have a better chance. Some of the smaller jurisdictions, you know, will be able to maybe get some of these projects off the ground that they hadn't, and they could be eligible for 100% eligible cost of this. And we're wondering too, when we look at those costs, what a lot of things that aren't defined here is whether we can use it for project development costs, could we use it for right-of-way, could we use it for supportive transportation? How about all those soft costs that are in there that, you know, are usually hooked to cities or counties to have to come up with those kinds of things. So those kinds of things, when we're demonstrating those kinds of projects and those at that level, especially at the city and the county, when we combine these projects and everything like that, I think local cost and cost share would be too much of a burden at this point for most of these. So what if that goes up to 130 million? We could look at some pretty nice large road projects along roadways, and you know, that's not necessarily in my county, but I think, you know, Chair Holmberg, Commissioner Holmberg talks about, you know, they have mostly roads to have to fix down there in Dakota County, not so much of the transportation pieces. And so when we look at that, I really like the idea that complete and green streets would be elements of this. I think we need to look at that full definition, and are we getting all those pieces of that? So I think that's another piece. When we looked at some of the questions too about qualifiers and everything like this, I don't think we should look at federal funds being a part of this at all, necessarily to be a qualify for this. I think that could again mix this all up, and there's specifically, you can only fund 80% of a project with the federal funds, versus we could do 90 or we could do 100% qualification on those kinds of funds. So trying to qualify these for that reason, I wouldn't support. But, you know, to require some other things, you know, projects must include municipal or regional motorized and non-motorized transportation system plans. I think that might be something that's reasonable to look at as part of that too, because we're all having to do those bikeways alongside the roads, you know, as it is and everything. So that's kind of one of those things to be considered. So I think in general, and what I'm hearing from my colleagues is the consensus is that we would like this to go back and have a lot more time there's a lot of small technical details, and I have a page of notes here. I'm not going to go through them all. I'm going to write them up for you. Good. So that you have them to look at. But I just think what I'm hearing here is that we want something that's very robust outside of the general solicitation, and something that uses the flexibility that the state is giving us to do really creative, help some of those cities that couldn't fund some of those projects through our counties. So I think this would be a win-win for us.
All right. Here's our lineup: Lindeke, Jenkins, Foster, Geisler, Holberg, Johnson, Ulrich. Member Lindeke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep it short, given the list of notable names there. I just want to reiterate what Councilmember Jolly was talking about. Specifically, I think reaching out to staff at the city and counties to ask them, what are the things that regional solicitation does well, but also what are some of the loopholes or problems, like Commissioner Cattell was just saying, soft costs as an example, where it'd be nice to have some funding that didn't come with those rules. And this is an opportunity to go in and do that. And so I'm really supportive of coming up with an alternative process of some kind, and it doesn't need to be wedded to the regional solicitation. The other thing I thought is I'm a little worried about, we've had many conversations in this group about geographic equity and geographic balance, but I'm worried about slipping those two terms together and thinking that they mean the same thing. So I want to be sort of a stickler about process number 6 requirement in law, and does geographic equity mean the same thing as geographic balance or not? And it doesn't mean every city gets a project or every county gets a project. Is that what is stated in the statute, or is there a different meaning that's embedded in these words? And so I just urge us to be a little careful about what that means. I don't know what it means. Hopefully someone else does. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Seems like a mixing of concepts
Yes.
there, doesn't it? At least the way we've historically treated it, equity versus geographic balance.
Yeah, well, so just to be clear, just clarity around that.
Okay, Member Jenkins, thanks for those comments.
Okay, so most of my questions have been answered by what I think is a fairly unanimous expression by the agencies who've spoken before me. So my question was going to be, as a citizen representative, is multiple processes a bigger burden? I think I heard an overwhelming no, this would be better as a separate process. So hearing that, from the beginning, I've supported, let's put a pause on this. And one of the reasons I'm more comfortable doing that is it also sounds like we pull these funds away from the regional solicitation, we can probably expedite them faster. So the pause may not, we may still get the money quicker with the pause and doing it right than tying it up in the regional solicitation. So I'd support a pause.
Thank you, Member Jenkins. And then on to Member Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So like everyone else, I think waiting puts us in a place where we could create a process that uses the money to the full purpose. For me, that feels like this is directed to transformational projects that are only committed to active transportation. And I think like big cross-jurisdiction ones like multi-region bike share or snow removal on sidewalks, I think waiting gives us the time to really develop the solicitation process out and communicate to the jurisdictions, this is what we're looking for with this money. So I guess my question is, do we have to wait until 2026, or could we create a solicitation for 2025, like one that is separate from the standard?
It's a great question. A few people have brought that up today, as well as the technical committees. The two options that we brought to you are either put it into this 2024 cycle, which seems like people are saying wait, clearly here today, or it's wait till 2026, which likely means no decision on these funds till mid to late 2026. In between there, the reason we can't do something kind of in the interim is because we've moved up this 2024 cycle by 4 months to give us more time to do the regional solicitation evaluation, a 2.5-year process to build the solicitation, and included in that carbon reduction, protect, active transportation. It might be a completely different process than you see today on different schedules, it might be different applications. Some people have talked about that today. And then you overlay the 2050 Transportation Policy Plan and the work of that's coming through this committee. And for that reason, we wouldn't be able to do anything until 2026.
Thank you.
Any follow-on, Member Foster?
No. That was
Okay. All right, thank you. Member Geisler, then Commissioner Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So maybe I'll be the nail that sticks up here. I actually think that delaying is counter to our goal to address climate change issues. And the fact that we could put money down to do non-motorized transit faster and simpler with a process we already have established, while building a new process that could be more streamlined, that could be better, could both be done. So I think that's a little counter to what we want to do, especially when you consider, Steve, you go back to slide 1 there. you know, a solicitation, evaluation, and prioritization, including technical review, scoring, and ranking. So we're gonna rebuild the solicitation in a different way for these funds, which is another layer of complexity. Also thinking about staff, thinking about the scoring, thinking about the process. And when I think about the last thing that we created to do that, which was the unique projects process, where we created a process to score it and evaluate it, and how that went over with this body and how comfortable we felt with those results. That is a certain level of concern to me of saying, yes, we could wait, we could maybe come up with it. Yes, there are definitely opportunities that this funding presents. I don't disagree with the value add side that has been discussed here at all. Yes, these monies can go and do a whole lot of good. 100% agree. But I think we also have the opportunity where we can say, we know we have bike ped projects. We know we have safe routes to school projects that are already planning to come in a regional solicitation plan. We have staff and scorers who understand how that process works. We have technical scoring processes that are already established. These are ways that we can get these projects going faster. So I would just challenge us to think about, to Steve's point, waiting another two to 3 years to potentially start soliciting for this, or starting to help fund projects right now that address this as soon as possible, while finding a better way in the future to enhance it and improve it later would be good. It doesn't necessarily mean that these projects have to be federalized. As part of what they've carved out, it said we could go with projects below the federal funding and then they just get scored, and we use the exact same scoring and application process, but we determine project need based on that. There are other ways to do that. We could also ask applicants to say, do you want to go for the state funds or the federal funds? You only get to pick one. And then as far as the process goes for evaluating and applying and all the requirements go, it's the same. We do have smaller localities that have applied for regional solicitation funds. They have some understanding of how the process works. They aren't cities of the first class who have way more resources to just throw more engineers at it. Some of these cities do know how regional solicitation works. If we add in another one, now they have two processes that they have to actively manage going forward to get funding for effectively transportation funds. Plus, when you throw in quarters commerce, plus when you throw in all of it, we're creating more and more avenues, more and more complexity to basically get funding. So I want to just make the statement that adding complexity to gain simplicity isn't always a net gain for the total. That being said, I'm excited that we have these funds here. I'm excited that we can get some of these goals accomplished and what the goal of these funds is. I think we should maintain that. I think we should seek to enshrine that as much as possible as we make forward motion of non-motorized transit. But yes, that's what I wanted to make a statement on. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Holberg, then Member Johnson.
So, I'm not gonna speak to whether or not we would choose A or B or whatever. I feel like there's been consensus that we don't want to throw this money into the regional solicitation as point one. And I won't argue with any of your points, but the current solicitation process for many of us was accelerated. Wasn't the opportunity to amend criteria or balance or anything. So we're sitting on a process that already many of us has recognized had need for reform or changes or discussion. I think moving forward that all of that could happen, and there may be an opportunity to accelerate this pot behind the 24 solicitation. There may be a clear group of projects that meet the state criteria that we could as an interim. But, you know, Hennepin County talks about the ADA compliance stuff on a transit corridor as opposed to just a transit stop. Dakota County has been saying for years, why can't we put our trails along our road projects in as a separate solicitation? Well, the state money is a perfect opportunity for funding the trail part of a road project, but we don't have any way to do that under the current process. And then I think when you look at this pot of money, the federal pot of money, and the different goals, there may be a need to realign the modal goals as far as percentage of money, et cetera. We will have the 24 solicitation to look at how currently the division of the funds in the various categories runs up against need. But I think that both can happen, the state money and the 26 evaluation process. And I think the state money is going to come out with consensus probably quicker because there's more flexibility. So I'm not buying into waiting till 26 to spend any of the state money at this point, but would ask that the technical committee come back with some recommendations with a dual process, identifying the limitations and opportunities within each funding pot and how the solicitation, I get that the Met Council staff doesn't want to do 2 separate rounds of solicitation. I get that, but there may be a way to provide either an expedited or a parallel application process of these 2 pots of money to get us where we want to go. And hopefully you guys are not back next month because I don't think you can do it that fast.
Okay, good. Thanks, Commissioner. Member Johnson and then Member Commissioner Ulrich.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of my comments have already been spoken to, so I won't repeat those because this is going to be very, very long otherwise. But just 2 really specific items that have come to mind. So one thing that's been mentioned is if we don't include this in 2024, we can't until 2026. And I wanted to probe that a little bit, understanding the reason why. So is this a Met Council staff is not robust enough to take this on top of this? And sort of, you know, if that is the case, I mean, is there any way to get additional staff on this? I mean, can the funds being given to the Met Council, it talks about there being a evaluation process and all these pieces to it, but could that even fund staff is a question I have. I mean, this needs to be managed, there has to be administration, so is that possible to use funds that way? So that's my first question. You can respond to that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the limitations is twofold. One is certainly a staff level, and I kind of listed off all the things we have in the next 4 years that are huge things, but it's also the committee time and the time of our partners to do the scoring committees and to bring options back to you as a committee. You know how that goes. That's a 9-month process, which takes about every minute of this tab committee. So it's both kind of from a staff capacity standpoint that we got new money, but not new money to administer it. But then also the capacity of the committees to take on the TPPs, regional solicitation evaluation, and a couple, more, essentially three solicitations at near the same time. So that's the limitations. We will have, as part of the regional solicitation evaluation, there is a task dedicated just to further exploring this, active transportation, as well as the other new funding sources. What I could envision is that task kind of gets kicked off early in the process. And it seems like there's some people want to talk about this new source and what we could do with it. And there seems to be excitement around it. So I think we'd kind of flip the schedule a little bit perhaps on that bigger evaluation and get some recommendations as to what, ideas for the funding source and really dig into it earlier in that process. Not knowing, I guess, what the time frame on the back end would be to get through all that, but it's Chris kind of alluded to, Unique Projects was 10+ meetings over many, many months. But I think that's what people want. That's what I'm hearing is people want the time to dig in and put their ideas on the table and debate this way or that way. And we will have time in the short term to do that. It's really starting this fall.
Okay, so that helps clarify it. I mean, again, we can't do anything about how the state law is written, but certainly a concern if Met Council doesn't have the staff time to properly administer this in order to get it started. That does tie our hands a little bit, but I think that's really good to have that discussion and just have the transparency around that. The second piece, and this came up on the Monday info call that the citizen reps and mode reps had, was that this money, even though we're talking about the regional solicitation, the state requirements on it don't say that it has to be infrastructure. And that's like a really key difference between what we're talking about with regional solicitation, which is entirely, when we're envisioning, even if we did, anything bike ped or, any safe routes to schools, we're talking about physical infrastructure that we're building. And it turns out the state funding does not have that requirement. As Member Foster alluded to, we could talk about regional bike share. I don't know how we've even fit that into the regional solicitation before this. I mean, it didn't cleanly fit into any category. There's operational costs. I mean, I think the word that we've heard a lot is transformative. I mean, there's not just the amount of money, but the way that it can be used is huge. So I don't want us to be restricted down to saying, well, can we add a trail here? Can we just fund more, bikeways or pedestrian pieces? Those are all fantastic. We already have systems to do that. This is such a huge opportunity to talk about these, again, transformational pieces that can improve and really take away barriers for people trying to get around in, again, non-motorized ways, which includes just, can I walk around in the winter and get to places? I mean, you can see all these potentials of just, these are barriers. We can do something about this with this pot of money. And if we tie it to the regional solicitation, whether that's tightly, it's loosely, it's one time only, and we come back to revisit it, I think it sets precedent that kind of gets us in trouble down the road. So I just want to state that, and just, I think there's a lot of questions. I want to slow the process down, but I certainly don't want to wait until the 2026 solicitation cycle. So anything we can do to talk about expediting that, I think is worthwhile for this group to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ulrich, and then Commissioner
When you wait this long in
Jepson.
the discussion, pretty much everything's been said, but I wanted, as Scott County, to say we agree it's a red letter day with comments of St. Paul. And I mean, it's not often we have such a wide consensus here on a topic, and that's probably to celebrate.
Yeah.
I think point 6 on the selection criteria is much more complex than at first glance. We've got the blue in geographic equity, but there's a lot more to that sentence. And I think that goes into why people don't apply, criteria, match. There's a lot more there. I think slowing down and getting this right is important.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Jepson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to highlight briefly what Commissioner Holberg had said earlier in the conversation about staff being prepared to turn something over so quickly. And just from a staff perspective for the counties and the cities, other than, Minneapolis, that Member Payne said they would be prepared to present something. Some counties and a lot of cities would be gravely underprepared, and the quality in which that application would be submitted would just not be there. So thinking of them in that situation. I do think, Steve, unfortunately, we've gotten a little beat up today, but I honestly do appreciate the intent behind this, because I'm assuming that we're gonna have the money. No one wants to hold on to taxpayer money longer than we have to. So what is the solution to start spending it? And there are definitely worthy projects out there, but I agree with the rest of my colleagues on this board that we just have to wait. So the final thing I wanted to comment on Member Geisler's comments. The issue is, I don't think we're talking about revamping the entire application. We may stick to a similar application process as the regional solicitation. My thing is, we just don't know yet. And until we know what that process is gonna be, it could be a complete 180, it could be completely the same. We just don't know, so let's wait to figure it out until we know. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. And then we're going to Member Barber, and then back to Member Jalali.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also not going to pick one option or the other. I can tell you, I want to level set on a couple of things very quickly. The staff brought this out initially because typically it's not this body's joy to sit on leaving money out there that could have an opportunity to be spent. So that's why it was originally a small chunk, then let's look at it. So I want to make sure that everybody recognizes that it's coming to this body with very, very good intent. And then the other thing, as I've heard several of the county commissioners talk about, is the staff being prepared to turn something over quickly. And this is the chance that I'm going to step up for Met Council staff. We also, during this time, are processing this current solicitation, also doing the regional development guide for the 2050 plan, also doing the next version of the TPP. So we are going to have to, as a body, be cognizant of what our staff as well can manage through this process to accelerate something. And which leads us, it may not be until a 2026 timeframe. But that also gives us the opportunity to do it right. But what I'm asking of all of you is a little grace for that, because what you're asking right now They're all nervous, and Charles is probably too scared to come say how much staff time this is going to take. And we're okay with that. We want to do the right thing because it is a transformative approach to how we do things. So we do want to do it right, but just also, share the same grace with us and our staff as we do this process.
Thank you. Member Barber, Member Jalali, and then Member Dugan, and then I've got a question.
Thank you, and want to fully recognize it's clear that the intention is to not let this opportunity go to waste, so I want to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge what points people have made about staff. I think what I would want to do is respond to this idea I've been hearing over the last handful of comments about not wanting to create needless complexity. I would wholeheartedly agree with that and offering just a few thoughts. The first being that my concern with just even doing like a one-off regional solicitation is that it sets a precedent that we can't get out of, or it creates a habit or a practice that we can't get out of. And so if we're even entertaining that route, I would want to develop some guardrails around like what is the amount of time, amount of funds, what projects are they funding, like some kind of binding commitment or like resolution or something that is enforceable that creates like the purpose behind that as we work toward the broader thing. Like that is at minimum what I would want to see if we go down that route, because I agree with the goal of let's get some money out the door to things that are already in play. And then to the broader points about like capacity and those pieces that I think are very relevant. I'm wondering, and this doesn't need to get answered right now, but it's just thoughts I'm having while sitting here, like questions. One would be if we had a concurrent process that's in the off year so that it's not all going at the same time, is that a route that helps set us up for success as we develop that? And then two, it seems to me like we have lots of projects that already went through a competitive process and did not get funded. And so another route we could explore is for spending the money down that when that faucet turns on in October, could we actually revisit projects that just like didn't get an award and look at them and say, we are going to bring these ones back, and we would like pull them out as they meet the eligibility so that we're not running them through the whole new one, and that we're actually like just back funding or whatever the term is, like things that could have gotten funded so that that money is going somewhere and has an existing need and actually theoretically satisfies the state requirement that it had gone through a competitive process. So I don't know if that's, I'm wondering aloud, maybe that's a way that we can kind of get through the uncertain unknown right now and meet all the different desires people have. I think that's worth looking into. So those are just some ideas for further consideration. That's really all. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Jalali.
I'd like to respond to that. That actually came up in our initial discussions of getting those projects. And as it went through the committees, then it was, well, that's not fair for us. The first ones have to do the federal requirements, the next ones don't. And then that's when the conversation started going different directions of, and that's when staff came up with these different options. So that's where it started. And that just, we found more and more questions as we went along of, especially even if you selected projects and came in the next year and had another solicitation, would the ones who received the federal funding withdraw their projects, now apply for the 100% funding? So that became who's eligible to apply if it was an off year.
Thank you for that, Elaine.
I think it's worth revisiting, and I'll just keep it at that, but I fully acknowledge it's been talked through, and like, I think it's worth just in this interim unknown phase, like, following every scenario through to completion and coming up with something. Because even if the concern is a risk of seeming unfair, then my point would be like, how do we develop a rationale? We got this money, we have the power to spend it, we have to lay out a rationale. Let's find out if we can do that. Like, I'm committed to figuring that out if that is a route we can legally go down, and then it becomes about how do we create like a rationale for it, even as a short one-off. So just appreciate that point and bringing that up as a reaction. Thanks.
Hey, Member Dugan, and back to Member Barber.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I defer to you. You said you had a question, so let me defer to you.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
I'll wait.
And I will also ask...
My question's for Chair Hager, so.
Okay. I will ask Chair Barber to jump in if I mistake. On the citizen members preparation call, we had a different impression on, particularly there was a concern on, I think we're very cognizant of this, on putting another layer of paperwork, if you will, process on already overworked staff, creating a whole nother process. Secondly, the way I understood it is that this could be an add-on not, just, and as I ask, I like Commissioner Holberg said, it's evaluated the same way as the legislation calls for, but it could be used separately. We don't have to federalize the fund. There's no requirement to do that, just because the regional solicitation does that. And what we may want to do is, I believe Commissioner Holberg suggested, is keep it in reserve, because let's just say we have Safe Route to School projects, and 15 of them, and 10 get approved, and 23 million could go, or 24 million could go to those other 5 now. And also, perhaps shouldn't be concerned about this, but if we don't get this money will not leave our bank account until 28, 29. And Steve, I believe you said, Mr. Paulson, about 125 million?
Thereabouts. It doesn't expire like federal dollars, and that's the good part.
But I think most stewards, handling fiduciary situations, if you have the money, you shouldn't just sit on it, let it do nothing, no interest, nothing. It just sits there, and it doesn't do what it was supposed to. So but again, I think we may find ourselves when projects are selected, that we may want to use that money just for what is intended, and then continue along the path to create another process. But I think the two need to be integrated. Otherwise, we'll just be, as Member Geisler said, adding complexity to achieve simplicity, and then just asking the staff to do one more thing. TPP, 2026 revamp, moving up to 2024 regional solicitation. And
All right.
Chair Barber, may I defer to you on something if I misspoke? No. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member DeGan. Member Barber?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand the sentiment of wanting to repurpose these dollars, for projects that were unfunded in other solicitations, and this will now also, if we make this decision, this will also include the awards next spring. It would require different applications because there are different rules to comply with the state law. And so we can't just say, the good news is we funded, using the heavy bike ped scenario, most of the projects that would fall under this category in the last solicitation, which is good. But the projects in the spring, if there are a few that we'd want to do, the application we have out there doesn't meet all the requirements of the state law. And so we'd have to look at a different process for it. It isn't just, hey, we're going to move some money over. At least that's our interpretation of the law for now. I'm sure we'll do some more discussions to make sure we have the legislative intent clear on some of these things, because I think even like some of the things like the geographic equity, I was listening to the hearing. I think they were thinking more geographic balance, but I could be wrong. But I think we should go out and clarify some of those things to make sure we know what we're talking about with all of this. But it's not just, hey, we've got this, let's move it over here. And it could be an interim process or an interim step that we build in possibly. So there's options. I think we have to be flexible. So we're not being rigid. I just want to say we just can't just say we're going to do this instead.
Interim is a better word. Thank you, Chair Barber. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Chair Hager, did you have a comment, Steve, you wanted to make?
Yeah, the question of, or the question of maybe coming back next summer and funding additional projects, that could be done. We may want to ask these 3 qualifying requirements in the application now to know who would qualify. If you want, it's either we'd have to go back at next summer and ask those applicants, do they fulfill these other 3, mostly the 2, which we could do. I mean, that's possible. Or we could put it in this solicitation with no money attached and then leave it flexible if you want to continue down those lists. But I'm hearing people don't want to do that either. So, but you could, let's just say you want to go back next summer and fund unfunded projects using some of the state funds. Then I think what we would do is we'd have to just go through those applications or talk to those applicants. And I think that's maybe what your point was, Member Jolly, was if you see this list of $100 million of bike bed projects and you want to use some portion of this funding, could you still do it next summer? And I think the answer is yes, with a few caveats, but yep.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was thinking that Is there any funding that's much more complicated than transportation funding, rhetorically? We got a couple other folks that wanted to speak, but Commissioner Holberg raised an idea, and I had to kind of chuckle to myself, because when the tab goes about its work of setting policy, we're really good at having these great conversations and then saying, okay, you technical people, you go figure it out and bring something back to us that's a plan. But that's, that's what we've historically done, frankly. And so when you think about building a selection process that is unique in the sense that it is peculiar to us historically because of what the legislature did. So you get this unprecedented opportunity. How can we build an effective and efficient system to take advantage of this opportunity that doesn't involve overburdening them, but maybe involves some of the entities that are sitting in this very room that are elected, counties, cities? Can our technical people help devise a mechanism, a selection process that aligns with what we do, but is not, as I said, subsumed into the regional process, and have that built out in a way where we could take advantage of it maybe within 12 months? What are your thoughts on that, Chair Hager? Because you chair the people that we trust and rely on every day in the operations of our cities and counties.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. At the
maybe.
risk of at the risk of going out a little bit on this limb, I think the technical committee members would welcome that conversation. MnDOT, for example, has an email out right now seeking applicants for a work group that they're pulling together to talk about their portion of the new active transportation funding and how it fits into the process that they already have, and a committee that would oversee the distribution of those funds over time. So it's not unheard of that we're asked as agency representatives to step up and step in and help, because it's really to the benefit of all of us. And I think we would welcome that conversation, because tying these funds to the regional solicitation just puts unnecessary and undue burdens on the local agencies, whether it's staff time and resources to deliver a project under the federal process, which is onerous, or the local funds that are required to provide a match, which isn't required with this funding source. And I do think the idea that was mentioned earlier about slowing down might actually be faster has some merit, because these funds, again, don't have to be administered through that federal delivery process, and agencies can move much more quickly. It's a much more streamlined process. And if projects are 100% eligible, with these funds, then we're also not having to dive into the middle part of our CIP and try and scrape together local funds to make something happen sooner. We can fit those projects in sooner, and they can be small, they could be large, whatever it is, they can have this regional benefit, and I think we can deliver on those in a much more streamlined and speedy manner than federal funds.
The other point I want to bring up directly to this is the counties are also getting a pot of money that has some of the same criteria. So by having the county reps at least involved in this discussion, we are going to set up goals how to spend our portion of the same pot of money with some of the very same criteria. And we're still struggling with how do we change our CIP to spend that money. And so having those people make some recommendations of how we make this all work together makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Commissioner, for that. And Member Geisler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to double up on Peter's comments there. I think what I don't want to see is at the end of the 2024 solicitation, when we make our selections, there are non-motorized projects that aren't funded when we have money sitting aside for non-motorized projects. I think that's a little opposite of the goal of what we're trying to do here. So that's the one essence I have. Again, I agree. If we can slow down to go faster, cool, let's do that. So far, it sounds like that's a maybe at best from staff, and I think we need to be aware of that. But when it comes to the other point that I wanted to make was around the 100% match. There's this thing that comes in of, say, when you have a cover charge, it limits who shows up. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be $1, $5, whatever. But if it's 100% free, how many applications around the 7-county metro would come into this that would have to be evaluated? My guess is way more than we see on the regional solicitation, because it's free money. There is no requirement of a local investment. And I think we all would recognize that, you know, as far as non-motorized transit tends to have a more localized impact than motorized transit, simply from the fact of humans don't walk 30 miles a day, usually anymore. And it's more of a local impact. I think not having any kind of match at all required, and I don't want to debate the percentage or whatever, but I think having zero match required is maybe not the proper goal that we should set aside. Whoever is applying should have some skin in the game for the project it is. Is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 20? Again, don't want to debate that right now, but I do think the applicants have to be able to put some money at the table to get this. Now, we also know that in our regional solicitation process, the 20% match comes from oftentimes many sources, not just the individual coffers. They may come from the legislature, they may come from other parts. We know that also the 80% and or the hard caps frequently don't reach the full amount of a project, especially in roadways. So I just think that we should consider that as, yes, the law doesn't require it, but is that a good governance practice to waive all, basically putting your money where your mouth is when you're putting in the application? Otherwise, we could end up with the localities that have more money to put in more applications could bury all the rest, which may actually upset geographic equity and or balance, whichever we're actually feeling applies here. So, thank you.
Thank you, Member Geisler. Charles? You're up next, and then back to Member Johnson, and back to Member Jalali, and then Commissioner Montes Castillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. You know, I think lots of great discussion today, lots of good inputs. Clearly, a preference to pick this up and design a process that reflects the complexity or the opportunities of these funds, you know, on a separate track as soon as we can. I think the near-term decision that TAB, you know, it's one thing to start giving a lot of input of how prescriptively to use these funds in a solicitation process. I think the more immediate decision before this body is whether to close the door on the option to select any projects in 2024. And so, you know, there's a couple tweaks in the application that would allow it to be consistent with state law, that then keeps this tool in the toolbox should TAB want to select any projects. If we release the solicitation next month without including these items, then the process won't be aligned with state law, and the option to select projects with these funds alongside the federal projects likely won't be available. So we want to acknowledge that as sort of the most immediate choice that would delay selection because a couple of the criteria aren't included in the process.
Walk through that one more time, please.
I don't understand. Doesn't make any sense.
I think people are trying to grasp what you're saying, me included.
So I think a lot of the disconnect at the technical level is about local match and how to develop these processes and what's different about non-motorized projects. Then there's the state law piece, and I think that's more immediate before the body. The selection process must include these items, and I think there's certainly great comments today about how inclusion in a plan, you know, does that mean at the point of application? Does that mean at the selection? I think there's ways to nuance that, but this is what's in state law. And so to the extent, you know, state law requires us to have a process that meets these requirements, it would be advantageous to include these requirements in the solicitation at the point that we release it. It doesn't mean that TAB is directing the use of all the solicitation, all the active transportation funds for selection in the solicitation. It's a bit like the carbon reduction funds where they came along later. It happened to align that TAB could recommend those projects to the council. I think this could be a similar item where you're not directing how active transportation funds will be spent in the solicitation, you're making a change to the application so that you could decide to spend those funds during the selection phase if you chose to.
All right, so what you're saying is items highlighted in blue, I think, is what you're saying, is
Yep.
that we should think about getting those included as criteria in the regional solicitation, regardless what we decide to do in terms of how to set up a separate process or whether to set up a separate process relative to the use of these sales and use tax funds.
Yep, and my concern is that if we don't include these items, it would be very difficult or not possible to, at selection time, say, well, there's these other great projects, let's select them for sales tax funds. They didn't include this process in the application.
Yeah, which goes to the point that if we asked our technical people to look at creating a system and they came back to us and said, you know, on balance, we think that we should probably just use the regional solicitation. Now these are baked in.
Right.
To the solicitation process, and we could shift over if we had to. So that's another thing to be mindful of. Okay.
Yeah, do we want the tool available versus all these particulars that are clearly going to take more time to work through to have a good process?
Right. Okay. All right. Now we got Member Johnson, then back to Member Jalali, and then Modest Castillo, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair. So I think that's very helpful to understand that this is sort of keeping an option open to us. I think when this was first presented, even on Monday, I didn't even think to ask that question about sort of why is this in there? You know, it just sounded like we were adding extra funds into the system. And I think that's what everyone was reacting to, is that just putting more money in didn't feel right for this. So if this really is something that you want to get sort of the response from us about, does this feel like something we want to ensure that this leaves an option open to us? I think that's a different conversation, and I'm glad we're getting to that for that. I'd love to explore that further. Just a couple points I just wanted to make on top of these, though, is that, you know, we really do have a lot of versatility in how these funds can be used. And I think it's hard for this group sort of on the spot to imagine what those are. I mean, even just during this conversation, my eyes have been open to how the money can be used differently. I think even on Monday, I can't remember if I asked or someone else did, but we got at least a discussion about, could you use these active transportation funds for the local match? You know, could it take the place of that, you know, in the process? And I feel like this group just today is not equipped to answer any of those like really detailed questions. I think this is why we have TAC, for example. But this almost feels like we should have a smaller work group that's just literally throwing ideas at the wall, getting responses back on it, saying, is this something we could even consider in the realm of possibility? So I think I'm kind of combining these two pieces together to say, I like the idea of sort of ensuring that the regional solicitation has options for us. I think there is that big concern, back to Member Jalali's comment, about like, if we do that and we sort of set precedent, what does that mean? I think I would like to see a resolution that we're not just putting money into the system, and that's what everyone was reacting to. But I really like the idea of a smaller subset of this group, maybe partnered with TAC, just really sitting down in a room saying, we're volunteering our time on this, we want to bounce ideas off of this and come up with solutions that we bring back to TAB. Because this group is just too big to do that, and we need to talk with people who are experts in the room about what we can and can't do, so it's not months delay between these conversations. So those are my thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Johnson. Did you want to respond or react?
Yeah, yep, I think good thoughts there, and we do plan to have said work groups, so that will be forthcoming late this year, early next year. We will form work groups, and there's clearly a TAB interest in this funding source and the direction it heads. So,
Great, thank you. Member Jalali.
I would be very supportive of that. I just wanted to very much appreciate what Member Johnson just brought up and all those ideas and the kind of values and points behind them of like, you know, the big picture value that I started out with in my comments in this topic are, I do not want like fake urgency or needlessly miscalculated urgency to create pitfalls that disserve our communities. And I think that we can come to some working solution without, sacrificing expediency. And I think the work group will help position us to do that. I think this conversation has surfaced a lot of points. I care very much about that as someone who wants to be able to move thoughtfully with money that is rare, we've never had before, it's going to be ongoing, and it is actually equipped to reach into places further based on how it is designed, and we should be really smart about how we do that. I wanted to respond to the local match idea like 4 questions ago, which is the nature of how these things go sometimes, but just to the point of like, as we develop a process, I would also encourage us to think about like, we don't have just the choices of require or not require something. We could also say, hey, we would also value and appreciate a local match, and like maybe your application gets extra points or something like that, so that we are not quite so binary, and that we should think about that. And that is like an example of something we could bring into this work group that's going to figure that stuff out, so that priorities, like governing priorities, such as making sure that, you know, there's not unintended equity consequences in how people can apply for this money, can be addressed through mechanisms that aren't quite so stark, or like the, you know, that we're kind of using the right instruments to get at that. So I just wanted to bring up that because we have all our own processes of the city where we're always trying to figure things like that out. So those are really my points. That's it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to go on this local match notion too from comments before. So in the active transportation legislation, there's no requirement for local match. And I want to be really clear that that does not currently exist, and it was with good intention so that we could get more projects proposed. And so I actually am concerned about us adding that to keep projects out, because I think that we have missed some important and creative and revolutionary ideas because of that requirement. And to suggest that without a local match, there's no skin in the game is woefully wrong in every way. Our staff is working. It is not a 100% funded project in any way. There is a lot that goes on prior to even applying for funds to do a project. So I just want to be really clear that there's a ton of skin in the game from every municipality and every project that happens with or without a match and financial dollars. So just wanted to add that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. And then Member Martinson. And then back to Member Dugan.
Other Member Martinson.
The other member.
So as the sole non-motorized representative on this body, I want to say I've been sitting here listening very carefully to all this great nuance and discussion and conversation. And man, I am so proud to be able to serve with such a group of thoughtful, really intelligent people who are trying to be good stewards of these dollars that are coming to us, and that we have the responsibility, right, to use well. And the deliberation that's going on here is exactly what we should be doing in order to figure out where that stewardship lies. So I wanted to say, first of all, just thank you for the conversation. This has been great. Second, I want to also point out this is something that hasn't come up yet, but I want to just mention it, that there's other reasons to keep these dollars separate from the federal dollars, right? As someone who's lived my entire working career on federal funding, mixed with state funding, mixed with nonprofit funding from foundations, you never want to schmurgle those dollars together if you don't have to, because the federal dollars always make things much, much more complicated. So, but one thing that hasn't come up is we've got these caps on what we can spend things on. And so right now, I think the cap on bike ped projects is 5.5 million, or is it 5 million? And so now if we want to talk about using this money transformationally for things for regional benefit, I can imagine, I can imagine a project like maybe bringing the Midtown Greenway across the river from Minneapolis into St. Paul. That might take $27 million to get that bridge rehabbed from Canadian Pacific and Kansas City. Maybe we need to have that kind of cap. So I think we need to have a different kind of cap on the potential projects for this, because if we are going to think about this regionally and transformationally, and it's not that people are going to walk 30 miles, but hey, I sometimes ride 30 miles getting to and from work in a day, right? So I think we need to be thinking about that as well. The other thing is, as the non-motorized representative, this is the first I've become aware of this bike and ped work group. And if there are members of TAB that are on that, I would like to offer my services to be on that. I have also offered my services to MnDOT to serve on their pending active transportation advisory board as well. So that's it.
Thank you, Member Martinson. Okay, the mayor, you're the mayor of Bike Ped. We'll make you the mayor of Bike Ped. Member Dugan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And you've spoken well for Matt Hollinshead, who couldn't be here, Brian, because of some other issue. But we guaranteed him that people would speak as he would speak. In regard to, I wanted to thank you, Chair, and Chair Barber, and Mr. Carlson, and Director Carlson, for clarifying my remarks. I didn't mean willy-nilly, the idea of interim and not being subsumed. But to Mr. Director Carlson's point, we would have that availability, because sure, we'll never fund 100%. We just don't, and that perhaps this would be, again, kind of like the carbon reduction funds, where we just figured out how to do that. And then we don't have to decide it now, but Commissioner, I would disagree with you on the match. Certainly for your county, absolutely, there'd be a lot of sweat in the game. I'm thinking, you know, if whenever something is free, we don't respect it as much. We just don't. Oh, free, you know, I don't. You know. Internally, even if it's, you know, $1, I mean, how many people drive 10 miles to spend, you know, redeem a $1 coupon? You spend more in gas. So I would probably disagree with you on that, but I hear what you're saying. You want to encourage, and anyway. But I wanted to thank you. Great discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mayor Winchell, did you have a comment or?
Nope.
Okay, and then Member Crimmins has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've appreciated hearing all these conversations. I'm just wondering, has staff reached out to the people submitting these projects to see if they can qualify to these requirements? There may not be a hindrance. I mean, most of the people that have submitted these projects, maybe they look at these requirements and say, these are no problem. We can match these, no problem at all. We're making a problem up, I think, where there may not be a problem. So I just wonder if anybody's reached out to them.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. We did have a joint meeting of TAC and funding and programming in June, and then a bike bed work group, as Mr. Martinson mentioned, which is a technical work group of bike bed experts throughout the region. That's a subgroup to the TAC and funding and programming and TAC planning group. So we did talk to them. What it comes down to is these requirements, you know, this is about 80% of what they're asked to do in the regional solicitation. There's maybe a few things you could trim and still be part of this here, but we haven't asked them, you know, the additional things are what's shown on the screen, but likely through the solicitation or another application, they'd be able to comply with a lot of these. I think that's your question. Could most of our applicants comply with these? Probably yes. The number one is the toughest though, on projects inclusion in a municipal or regional non-motorized plan. That's the one bar that is going to be more difficult. You have to be in a bikeway plan, ADA transition plan, a sidewalk plan for a city, safe routes to school district-wide plan, and not all projects that flow through the solicitation or that people want to do will have met that requirement. Right? Would you agree with that?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I think many applicants could meet these requirements, as Steve said. And I think if we wanted to talk about the local match and potentially lower the barrier to entry for other types of applicants, smaller agencies, for example, they would be coordinating with their local, county or city on the plans that that agency has in place, because they would have to anyway, because we're talking about, if it's an infrastructure project, something that's going to be on public right of way anyway. So I think most applicants would be able to meet this bar that's described in the legislation. I think the trickiest piece of this, and this has been talked about already, is number 6, and what was intended by those who wrote the law, and how does that roll out with the distribution of the funds.
Okay, really fabulous discussion today. And these other two informational items, I just asked Elaine, can we postpone these, but because we're losing quite a few people. So a couple of questions come to mind here as we try to wrap up this discussion and give the guidance. These are not action items we're talking about. We're trying to give some general guidance. But how do people generally feel or think, is a better term, I guess, about the idea of these process requirements in law that Steve has highlighted, 1, 2, and 6, that we direct staff to include them in the regional solicitation, regardless what we decide to do with respect to a separate sort of selection process being created. It seems like maybe a logical step that we should do. Commissioner.
First of all, there's a difference. The first two are application requirements. The third one is a selection requirement. And so we already have equity issues in the application already that we as the selectors could use. So I don't even think that requires any kind of change to the current, what's being proposed application process. Because you have to, that's part of the process already, your communities and, you know, is it geographic balance or equity? That's a selection issue for us to contend with, not necessarily an
criteria.
application issue. I mean, having the first two be some kind of check off or whatever. I mean, I just think that it's gonna, I don't know, I think it's gonna make things more confusing, but I mean, if you submitted a transportation plan as part of comp plan as a city, is that a non-motorized transportation plan? I don't know. If it, you know, some of these things aren't even defined that we're saying, you know, our criteria, that's the part that I hesitate with, is because, I mean, I don't know what it means, I guess. And so, you know, so what does it say that we comply with complete streets? You know, do we pass a resolution, say we comply with complete streets, or is somebody gonna come in and evaluate the application under complete streets criteria? I mean, we don't even know. That's why it seems really rushed. This law passed the money, and just to try and like shoehorn it into a process that starts within 30 to 45 days, I think is not good.
Yeah, that's a good question on timing. So I was thinking that there was some exigency here with regard to those three criteria we were talking about, but maybe there's something we can hold off on and you can talk about it on a technical basis. Should those criteria that are part of the law for dispersing any potential funds from the sales tax and use tax monies, things that we should include in a regional solicitation, and how soon does that decision need to be made?
So, Mr. Chair, if I'm understanding, I think what we could do is take the feedback from TAB today. Funding and programming takes this item up tomorrow, and they could start taking a look at, can you go back to that slide? Where's that one with the three highlighted?
Yep.
Funding and programming could start taking a look at those three items. I would agree that the last one is more of a selection item that TAB could potentially be taking up at a later date. So focusing maybe on the first two and how they may or may not fit into the application. Ask our representatives on the committee whether they think that their agency can meet this bar or not, and what challenges might be presented by that, and then make a recommendation back to TAB, because you're not taking action today anyway. Make a recommendation back to TAB if it goes through TAC, and then back to TAB in August on what we think those changes could or would look like in the solicitation package, and how that may or may not affect agencies' ability to meet that requirement in their applications.
Can I just illustrate for me why I think this is a problem? Yeah. So we have a regional solicitation, so let's call that game A. Everybody knows the rules, the board's there, it's set. And then we kind of throw this in here as part of the application, just in case game B gets put on the card table to play. I think it's gonna make things confusing.
It's gonna make the solicitation too. People won't maybe apply because, well, I can't meet that. And are we gonna make it a part of that?
No offense to my friend, Mr. Carlson.
It'll be confusing.
But there is so much flexibility in the law that if we go through with the 24 regional solicitation, let's say there's 6 or 7 safe route to school projects that appear to really align with this, we could send out a sub-solicitation process and ask them whether they meet those 2 criteria if we decided we wanted to give it out another 20 million or whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'll argue with you all day for years. We've argued on particular points.
All right, let's let your friend, Mr. Carlson.
Right, but I mean, in his world, it's easier to have this on the initial application.
You're making good arguments.
I get that. But in our world, as TAB and the decision makers, we could, after we see how 24 goes, if we want to accelerate some funds, have a sub or an expedited process under a limited umbrella and at a limited amount of money. And you might not like it, and it's bad for your staff, and it makes you nervous, because you're the one that has to go back to the legislature and sit in front of them when they're not happy, when stuff goes crooked, but they didn't put up a lot of guardrails for us as a tab in this money.
And that goes to like my comment of we should maybe at least confirm legislative intent, because we're very happy with everything that happened. We want to do the right thing and make sure we're not going crosswise with what the intent was.
Okay.
I still am concerned that if we put those questions in on the solicitation, that this could be extremely confusing to applicants.
Yes.
It will be. It absolutely will be. And if it's a just in case kind of a thing, it's just like, well, and this is going to be very confusing and it's going to be a problem.
For $24 million.
Yeah.
All right. Good points. I'll give some direction for the active transportation project. First of all, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. I try to always abide by that. So let's try not to do too much. I really think, here's my points. Let's just keep to the 7 requirements of the law, period. You know, and then if we implement these grants, maybe the legislature's gonna, wow, they followed the law. It's a really good thing. Maybe they'll fund more money. And then the other thing is, I don't want to see this in a solicitation. Take that off the table, separate grant. And then just TAC and staff, Med Council staff continue to work together like you always do in a really good way, and probably come back with some pretty refined draft that we may not be able to vote on, but at least gets us really close.
Hold on. What don't you want to see in the solicitation? Those 3 criteria or the monies in the solicitation? For what we're talking about, the sales and use tax.
I don't want to see the 24 million rolled into any federal
I just wanted
solicitation.
to be clear about that. All right.
Mr.
You're waving, don't dislocate your shoulder.
Again, the state law, it says the process must include solicitation, evaluation, and prioritization, including technical review, scoring and ranking, project selection and award of funds to the extent practical.
Hold on a second, hold on. We're losing people, right? Commissioner, are you comfortable with us sending to the TAC and the funding and programming this notion of come up with some ideas on how to create a separate sort of mechanism for a selection process for these?
When is the solicitation going out to the public? When's the go, no-go date before you know you have to amend the document?
The current schedule is that TAB would release approve the solicitation for release next month.
Yeah, see, that's just.
I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about this idea of how we use, what do we do with the sales and use tax monies? Do we want a separate sort of
The
mechanism?
question that's most in front of this group in my mind is whether or not you put points A and B into the documents that actually are put out to our partners for the 24 solicitation.
That was question number 1. I'm asking you question number 2, which is more substantive and important. And that is, who do you want to have build a selection process that's unique to this unprecedented opportunity? You want our technical people to take a look at it, counties and cities?
And come back with a plan, but I don't think 1 and 2 should be part of the.
Yeah, no, I don't think we're going there.
Keep it clean.
Yeah, I think we're gonna defer on that.
Don't put 2 game boards on the table in the same application process.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's where I'm at.
And that's clear direction that certainly we can use and aligns with things here today.
And knowing fair well that if next summer, after we go through the solicitation, we want to yank some state money, you guys are gonna go apoplectic and,
So, yeah,
the fireworks are
deciding
gonna go off and we'll have to deal with
All right,
all that.
so then let's send to everybody.
Game 2 next summer.
Is everybody comfortable?
Yeah.
Is everybody comfortable?
Someday your hair will start going gray, Mr. Carlson.
Is everybody comfortable sending the funding and programming and TAC this idea that we'd like to have them at least talk about them being the creators of a selection process that's unique to this unprecedented opportunity here?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yes.
And then see what they say. If they feel like they're comfortable, they can do it, and then we can take pressure off the Met Council staff and we put it on the people that we work with day in, day out. Jenny? Okay. Member Geisler?
Mr. Chair, I would also like to hear from TAC if they are comfortable with having, since most of them are scorers themselves or talk to them all the time, if they are willing to take on a separate scoring process. I would like to hear that from TAC if they believe that that is an.
Yeah, I think, I agree with you. I think that's embedded in there that they have to address that. Yep. Commissioner?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So to that point, Member Geisler, so a lot of you in this room who are commissioners know of our Anoka County's engineer, respect him, very intelligent, Joe McPherson. He, I've been texting him through this. He fully supports TAC and FNP, looking and reworking a solicitation process as well as supporting.
Yeah, Brendan asked him.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. Okay, I think, Steve?
Yep.
This is unbelievable discussion.
It was.
It
This
took
was one
the
of the
whole
best
time,
discussions, yeah.
and I'm feeling really bad for Liz Roten and Steve Elmer. But I think we all.
They're gone probably by now.
No, I mean, they may be happy, I don't know, but it's 20-3 and we gotta let people go. And so we gotta defer on these two, other informational items, I'm sorry to say. But, really, fantastic conversation today, and we ended up with some really good guidance. Thanks, everybody, for participating. I think Brian Martin said it well. Really wonderful to be part of a conversation like this. So, anybody have any items for the good of the order? Cover? Okay.
The view is much better from this side of the table.
George, you know, he made it 5 days into his bike trip, and his wife got some horrible tooth infection, so he had to bail on the trek from Arizona to Banff.
Oh, no.
Anyway, so that was the only thing I thought was worth reporting out on here that I knew about. Anyway, all right, we stand adjourned. I'm
Thank you.
muttering away up here. Let's go home. Let's go back to whatever else we're doing.